Have you ever walked into a room wearing something a little too bold? Said something that felt a little too honest? Or dared to be just a little too you? And immediately felt like shrinking back? You're not alone. Today we're talking about a deeply human tension, the fear of standing out, and how society often quietly and unconsciously pressures us to fit in. We'll explore why we crave belonging, how social norms shape our identity, and why being different can feel so uncomfortable, even when we want to be ourselves. Because whether it's in school, at work, online, or just among friends, the pressure to blend in doesn't always come from others. It often comes from within. Let's break it down. Let's start with the basics. Humans are social animals. For most of history, being part of a group was a matter of survival. You hunted, ate, and protected each other. If you were accepted, you lived. If you were rejected, you were vulnerable. Alone. That need for belonging didn't just disappear when we got cities and smartphones. It's still hardwired into our brains. That's why we care so deeply about fitting in. Our brains evolved to monitor our social standing. We scan the room. We measure ourselves against others. We adjust our behavior to maintain inclusion. It's not vanity. It's survival instinct. Now let's talk about the invisible rules we live by. Social norms. Norms are unwritten expectations. They tell you how to dress, how to speak, when to laugh, what's appropriate in public. And the wild part? Most of us follow them without ever realizing it. When you wear jeans instead of pajamas to the grocery store, that's a norm. When you say fine instead of answering honestly, that's a norm. When you avoid sitting too close to a stranger on a nearly empty bus. Yep, that's a norm. These rules keep things orderly. They help groups function. But they also punish difference, especially visible, expressive, or disruptive difference. When you break a norm even gently, you risk being labeled weird, awkward, rude, dramatic, intense, too much. So most of us learn early, play the part. Blend in. Don't make waves. Conformity isn't always a bad thing. It makes social life smoother, helps us connect, and gives us a shared language. But it also comes at a cost. When you're constantly adapting to avoid standing out, you slowly chip away at your authenticity. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You nod along with opinions you don't fully agree with. You shrink your personality to fit the room. Over time, that self-editing becomes muscle memory. You don't just act a certain way, you start becoming it. And here's the danger. You can lose touch with what you actually think, feel, or value. Because you've been too busy managing how you're perceived. That's the quiet tax of fitting in. Standing out feels risky for one core reason. It invites attention, and possibly rejection. When you're different, you're visible. And when you're visible, you're vulnerable. That might mean getting judged, being misunderstood, facing questions, whispers, side eyes. Or worst of all, silence. Psychologists call this evaluation apprehension. The fear that others are watching and judging your every move. This is why public speaking terrifies people. Why so many brilliant kids stay quiet in class. Why creative ideas die in meetings. Because standing out makes you a target. And our brains still treat that like a threat. Here's a fun illusion your brain plays on you. The spotlight effect. It's the belief that people are paying more attention to you than they actually are. You trip over a word and it echoes in your head all day. You wear a bold outfit and you're convinced everyone's staring. You speak up in a meeting and replay every awkward pause. But here's the truth. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves to notice you. We're all trapped in our own spotlight. Which means you're probably not being judged nearly as much as you think. But the fear feels real. So we edit, shrink, and hide. Let's talk about a modern amplifier of conformity. Social media. Online platforms were supposed to help us express ourselves. But somewhere along the way they started pushing us to look, think, and speak in the same ways. The same poses. The same captions. The same viral opinions. Algorithms reward sameness. The content that spreads is often what feels familiar, polished, or socially safe. Anything too raw, too nuanced, or too offbeat. It risks being ignored or worse, criticized. So even online, where we should be free, We often find ourselves curating versions of ourselves that feel acceptable, digestible, and brand-friendly. It's conformity with filters. In some communities, workplaces, schools, even families, there's not just pressure to fit in but pressure to stay silent. Disagreeing can feel like betrayal. Asking hard questions can make you difficult. Admitting you see things differently can make you feel isolated. So people hold back. Not because they lack thoughts, but because they don't feel safe expressing them. This isn't just a personal issue. It's a systemic one. When organizations or societies punish difference, they don't just lose diversity, they lose truth. They lose creativity. They lose progress. The cost of silence is far greater than we often realize. Let's be clear. Standing out doesn't have to mean being a rebel, an outsider, or a provocateur. It can be quiet. Choosing not to drink at a party. Dressing in a way that reflects your culture or values. Expressing vulnerability in a world that tells you to stay cool and collected. These are forms of nonconformity. Not because you're trying to be different, but because you're trying to be yourself. And that takes courage. Because even small acts of authenticity can feel threatening when they go against the group's script. But they matter. They make space for others to do the same. So what can you do if you want to live more authentically but still feel that fear? First, acknowledge it. The fear is normal. It's ancient. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're human. Second, start small. You don't have to be radically different overnight. Begin by noticing where you hide, where you perform, and where you want to step out, even just a little. Third, find your people. Being different is easier when you're not alone. Surround yourself with those who respect your voice, not just your agreement. And finally, redefine courage. It's not the absence of fear, it's moving through it. Every time you act in alignment with who you are, despite the fear, you strengthen that muscle. That's how standing out becomes less scary and more real. Here's the truth. Societies need people who stand out. We need disruptors and deep thinkers. Artists and whistleblowers. Question askers and slow movers. People who don't follow the crowd simply because it's moving. Fitting in may keep things stable, but standing out is what moves things forward. Every major cultural shift, every movement, invention, or revolution, started with someone who dared to be seen, to speak differently, to break the pattern. So if you've ever felt like an outlier, you're not defective. You might just be ahead of the curve. Standing out is scary. Fitting in is easy. But disappearing isn't what you were born for. You were never meant to shrink into a version of yourself that pleases everyone. You were meant to show up as you are. Different. Honest. Complicated. And while society will always try to nudge you back into line, you get to choose whether to obey or to belong on your own terms. Thanks for watching. If this gave you something to think about, hit like, share it with someone who's struggling to be themselves, and subscribe for more thoughtful dives into the way our minds and cultures shape who we become. Until next time, remember, fitting in is safe, but standing out is freeing.